Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Red Raptor Writes. Last month gave us the box office smashing Spider-Man No Way Home, the third entry in the MCU's Home series. Whether or not more films come to fruition, we'll see. I never made an official review to give my thoughts on the latest installment, but as a lifelong Spider-Man fan, there's no way I can pass up an opportunity to talk about it. But at this point, I'm sure a million different YouTubers already gave their initial impressions, so I'll reject that answer and choose something different. I've mentioned in the past that, in my humble opinion, Homecoming is pretty good, Far From Home is painfully mediocre, and now No Way Home is good. Easily the best of Tom Holland's Spider-Man. With a full trilogy under our belt, I want to see how they work as a whole, the ups, the downs, and the in-between. How will the Home Trilogy be remembered? How should it be remembered? And spoiler warning for those who haven't seen the latest film. Let's dig this up. Of course, let's start by talking about our main protagonist, Spider-Man, or at least Tom Holland's version of him. For all the positives and negatives we're going to go through, none of them can distract from Tom's performance in this role. He's a great actor who consistently gives his all. Tom can be funny, charming, and emotional when he needs to be. That's not simping, he's just excellent at his job, but not as Nathan Drake. Does that mean he's the best Spider-Man?
No.
Our lead has the potential, but it's not utilized nearly as often as it should be. The first halves of Homecoming and Far From Home mostly care about being nothing burger comedies, unfortunately. Thankfully, in those second halves, and in No Way Home, he's able to show more range. Speaking of range, I appreciate finally getting to see the darker side of the web-slinger, going ham on the Green Goblin and even attempting to execute him. Spider-Man isn't just a happy-go-lucky quip machine. Nah, he needs those moments of fury where he's a step away from punching off someone's head. I haven't seen anything like that in theaters since the Sandman fight back in 2007. Things got serious for the finales of the first two movies, but nothing quite like this. Again, the focus on being a light comedy in line with other generic Marvel movies has been a huge problem for this series, and until No Way Home, Peter himself was the biggest victim of this. The carefree nature has often meant that his character received no consequences for his actions. Without stakes, without consequences, how was I supposed to get invested in these stories? The duality of living a double life should be ruining him. So much should be going wrong, but no. For the most part, the MCU Spidey has it easy. All this dude got for his actions were slaps on the wrists, or instant forgiveness, or nobody noticed. Almost like a new Skyrim playthrough with instant speech 100. Looking back on this trilogy, and the last one in particular, I'm torn on Spider-Man's character growth. The Uncle Ben origin stuff already occurred by the time we met Tom in Civil War, but each subsequent film still presents itself as a coming-of-age story. Yeah, I get it, maturing takes time and you don't grow up within a few days, but at which point do we finally get a Peter who's, here comes the R word, responsible? Seriously, 3 entries in and he still needs speeches on responsibility. After an entire trilogy and other MCU films, we conclude back at square one, making everything feel like an extremely prolonged origin.
But why? Why would you do that? Why would you do any of that?
Now, there are some other points to make regarding the web-slinger, but they'll be addressed alongside other relevant topics. Overall, when it comes to this interpretation of Spider-Man, Tom has a ton of potential in the role. It's great when that potential shows, but isn't on display often enough. If the writers met the actor's level, this trilogy would be in much better shape. Now, let's continue with the supporting characters, Ned, Aunt May, and MJ. These guys are all over the place in terms of quality. Let's get this one out of the way. I really don't like Ned. In Spider-Man Homecoming, he was annoying as always, being one of my least favorite comedic relief characters in cinema. Rewatching Homecoming for this video, I prayed on my hands and knees for him to shut up. Thankfully, he eventually became useful as the quote-unquote man in the chair, aiding Peter with his tech skills, and being of actual use when it came to bringing down the Vulture, so it was nice for this guy to bring something to the table. By the time Far From Home came around, Ned's singular function was comedic relief, so basically he turned into the next Jar Jar Binks. Wait, I'm sorry, that one was a little harsh. To Jar Jar.
Heck, I'd even take him.
All Ned contributed to the movie was dating this universe's version of Betty Brant, and haha, aren't high school relationships so funny? By the trilogy's end, he still embodied the same role, but admittedly was able to receive some importance, being the one who brings in the other Spider-Men, which still, it isn't like he's doing much, instead just summoning better characters to do something. Once Peter loses his best friend at the trilogy's conclusion, I couldn't help but feel empty, hollow, like I didn't care.
I didn't care.
If only the writers did more to invest me in this friendship aside from, haha, Betty, I might have felt something. Anything. Unfortunately, this is a common theme. Aunt May sees the same exact treatment. I get that the MCU wanted to try new interpretations of its characters because, yeah, we just had 2 Spider-Man series and repetition could have felt stale. However, their treatment of this character has been abysmal. Homecoming did show some of that protective, anxious side of her for 2 short scenes, even referencing Uncle Ben's death at one point and its lingering impact. Really though, in the first 2 entries, she also got shoved into the comedic relief role. Funny how Disney does everything possible to pander to woke culture and the far left crowd, only to turn one of the most endearing female characters into a target to get hit on constantly. Haha, oh my gosh, isn't it so funny that Aunt May's hot now? Come on guys, laugh. The joke doesn't even make sense. In universe, no one knows she's supposed to be an old bag instead. It all comes off as creepy. Far From Home has the same problem, except minus all the hints of goodness. This very protective woman whose husband was murdered finds out that her nephew, her surrogate son, is a superhero who gets shot at and fights supervillains. That should lead to some interesting conflict, right?
Wrong!
Nah, she's just alright with it, even cheering him on at events. I guess we can't have emotional family drama in our wacky high school comedy. What a wasted opportunity. No Way Home does introduce a bigger role for this Aunt May, since for the first time, she's directly involved in the main conflict, helping her nephew fix the multiversal villains. But not to get ahead of myself, for now, let's call her role in this movie questionable. That leaves us with Michelle Jones, who, surprise surprise, gets similar treatment. Although she's more of a comic relief nuisance in Homecoming, she showed potential for the future, potential crushed by the lack of trying in Far From Home. Stop me if you've heard this one before. The sequel completely rushed her relationship with Peter. Like, for real, the first film ended with them starting to become friends, and then we immediately jumped to, oh goodness gracious, I have to ask out MJ cause I'm in love with her. Then, the final installment finally provides our leads with a believable and endearing romance. But like the other 2 characters mentioned, her goodbye with Peter would have been way more impactful if the previous movies had actually tried. This is why I've been so critical of this interpretation over the years. By not taking themselves seriously, by not trying to be more than funny high school comedies, all that groundwork of getting us invested in this journey, in these characters, in these relationships is missing. Because the 3rd entry finally tried, the writers had to do a lot of backloading. No Way Home does too much of the heavy lifting to the point where the emotional investment is impossible to pull off, but I'm impressed at how close they made it. If the previous 2 put more effort aside from being like MCU filler, then this could have been an amazing send-off. Not to be a Raimi fanboy, even though I am, let's make a comparison here. The original trilogy is silly and goofy, yes, that's their style and brand of humor, but those first 2 movies put plenty of effort into compelling drama between its characters. they still took themselves seriously as passionate love letters to the comic book hero and his world. We get invested and brought along on these very emotional journeys, so by the time that much weaker third movie came around, many scenes still packed a punch because the groundwork was already laid. I think we're finally ready to have the very controversial Uncle Ben discussion. It's been stalled long enough. In my opinion, when all is said and done, Uncle Ben was done dirty. His existence is barely acknowledged aside from an ambiguous line in Homecoming and initials on a suitcase that gets blown up. When we first meet Peter in Civil War, he had already gone through his origin. Us audiences didn't see it, and we didn't need to. The effect felt by the man's loss was still clearly felt, but then something weird happened. The writers turned Tony Stark into Peter's father figure and mentor. Rather than the guilt of getting Uncle Ben killed serving as Spider-Man's motivation, it was pleasing Mr. Stark, proving himself to Stark, doing what he thought Stark would want. Then once Tony's out of the picture, Aunt May finally gets to do something as a replacement for her husband. She teaches Peter about responsibility, says the famous line, and then dies. It was fine not showing Spidey's origin, as long as Uncle Ben received the love he deserved and not kicked aside like he never existed.
Here, please hit me as hard as you can.
We know Peter already had his origin, and we're content with that. So why No Way Home felt the need to revamp the origin story boggles my mind. Yeah, it's nice to have Aunt May finally do something, but why? To make matters worse, when Toby and Andrew discuss their Bens, Tom never mentions his, only acknowledging May. So did he ever exist or not? And why is this even a question? One very bright spot in the Home Trilogy is its villains. The universe in which they appear is full of bland, forgettable bad guys. Too often we're given dull stand-ins whose only job is to be the hero's punching bag. Thankfully, that doesn't happen here. Each villain Spider-Man duels is portrayed as an actual person, someone who truly lives in this world and is affected by the grand CGI-filled events we take for granted. Adrian Toomes was a construction manager or contractor guy who cared for his employees and family above all else. The blue-collar worker kept trying to justify his actions as putting the fight to elites like Stark. Class warfare, us versus them type stuff, not acknowledging that he himself has become rich off of the pain of others. Quentin Beck had a similar story since he was an employee of Stark's who got screwed over with his creation turned into literal barf. Beck then united a group of scientists with similar experiences to pull off the whole Mysterio scam. These characters are not only helped by having actual character, but with their roles filled by some of the best talent of today. Michael Keaton did a fantastic job in Homecoming, especially in that thrilling car ride scene. Even on subsequent watches, my butt still clenches like crazy. He definitely sells the working man angle so well.
Hey, I don't need this. I don't need this working class hero crap.
Jake Gyllenhaal needs no introduction. You already know he'll be amazing in whatever role the man's given. I've watched the sequel 3 times so far, and with each viewing, his acting is so good that I desperately want to have entered into an alternate universe where Mysterio is a hero. Jake is that compelling. One cool detail is how they turn Vulture into an actual vulture. Toomes flies around, taking the scraps left over from other battles, and makes his living off of them. This added another fun layer to his character. It is unfortunate that both are motivated by a hatred of Tony Stark, which has gotten old very fast in the MCU. But it could be fitting considering our protagonist is an Iron Man fanboy. Toomes said it himself.
People up there, the rich and the powerful, they do whatever they want. Guys like us, you and me, they don't care about us. We have to pick up after them. We have to eat their table scraps.
Spider-Man was literally cleaning up Iron Man's scraps. Not the big world-ending monsters, but the angry guys who've been displaced. These great speeches were given, but that's all they ever amounted to. Speeches. Empty monologues. They had no effect on Peter. He didn't care. Spider-Man, the superhero known for his empathy, who can relate to these bad guys more than anyone else,
Didn't care.
Tony Stark was always an all-good saint who can do no wrong, and no antagonist made good points to him. Spider-Man confronted Stark's legacy by cleaning up after him, but without ever considering what that legacy is, never addressing the dark side of Stark's past. Stark Industries sold weapons to terrorists. Tony himself spun a misleading narrative to recruit a teenager against Captain America. But who cares? Once again, I have to say, what a wasted opportunity. Thank goodness that empathy comes out for No Way Home. Spider-Man's goal feels very in character, or at least how his character should be, hoping to cure each villain before sending them back to their universe so they don't die. Nice change. Only problem is, Sandman and Lizard don't die. Plus, Doc Ock will die anyway. Maybe they forgot to rewatch the best Spidey movie, but he chooses to perish by destroying his fusion device once he's back in full control of his mind. I'm simplifying since this isn't a Spider-Man 2 video, but all Tom accomplished is speeding up his demise by a minute. Really, the only ones cured and saved are the Goblin and Electro, so 2 out of 5? Aside from that obvious flaw, Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin is still as terrifying as ever, even in a different universe. Alfred Molina is still amazing as Octavius. Heck, even the Amazing Spider-Man villains receive a nice update, with the Lizard design looking less like an abomination straight out of hell, along with a total revamp of Electro's character. If Jamie Foxx was given this treatment before, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 could have been not terrible. Sandman, though, needed another draft, because I have no idea what his motivation is. At first, he helps Peter because the sooner everyone's cured, the sooner he gets to be with his daughter. But then he joins Electro to escape because, even with the flaws of their multiversal villains, the antagonists of the series often shine as its best parts, which is a nice change of pace for the MCU. Spider-Man has a vast array of fun and intriguing bad guys, so I'm glad they were done so well here. If there was any way to describe the Home Trilogy, unfortunately, that would be missed potential, which sounds incredibly harsh, I know, especially from a guy who enjoys 2/3 of its installments. Don't get me wrong, there's a ton of good within this series, but that good is barely allowed to rise above its limitations. Now, it's difficult to assign intent to someone. I don't know what Jon Watts' outlook was going into the trilogy, but like the Amazing Spider-Man duology, corporate filmmaking seemed to take the lead on these. As part of the MCU, Spider-Man had to fit within the universe. In some cases it works. The Wallcrawler is a fun addition to the big Marvel crossover events, and I appreciate the contextualization this provides. In his solo films, Spidey isn't saving planet Earth from cosmic events, but taking on the lower level criminals that get left over from those events. In doing so, we witness the impact of the big budget spectacles on the lives of ordinary citizens. If that was all I had to say on the subject, then we'd be in good shape. Too bad it isn't. As installments of not just its own trilogy, but the MCU as a whole, it often feels like the writers are thinking what works for their Marvel brand rather than what works for the story we're trying to tell. Case in point is the excessive use of bathos. If you haven't encountered this term before, it refers to a sudden tonal shift from the dramatic or climactic to utter redonkulousness. This whole franchise feeds incessantly off of bathos, and it comes back around here. Intense or emotional moments usually get undercut by an absurd event or slip of the tongue from Ned, almost as if they're more afraid of showing real emotion than the Jedi Order.
There is no emotion. There is peace.
Apparently, Jon Watts just had to fit the lighthearted, whimsical tone all the time. It's difficult to imagine these movies as creative works from a passionate filmmaker rather than a churned out factory product. Okay, let me be fair. Credit where credit is due. The second halves of both 1 and 2 pick up the slack, trying way harder than their carefree first halves. 3 gives the same annoying tone for the first half an hour or so, which is an extremely dangerous game to play with already established and beloved characters from better films. Making a joke of Doc Ock, not a great selling point.
What's your name again?
Dr. Otto Octavius.
God had mercy on my soul in the theater opening night, since that MCU tone left with the introduction of Norman Osborn. Comedic levity is fine and all, but not at the cost of your story and your characters. The rest of No Way Home found that balance, for the most part. Joking about Harry's death is up there in terms of stupid Ned moments. So the final film found itself earlier than the previous two, thankfully. Also, as part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Peter Parker's character development through the series is compromised. Instead of a natural progression through the movies like any competent trilogy would build, Peter's pulled in different directions depending on whatever Kevin Feige wants him to be. His arc through the trilogy is clear, or at least it should be. Civil War and Homecoming have that clear progression. Peter is a huge fan of the Avengers, and especially Iron Man, so he wants to be out there saving the world with his heroes, but over time, learns to appreciate where he is. Our protagonist rejects the call to be Iron Boy, instead choosing to be true to himself. Although more introspection on what it truly means to become like Stark would have helped, still a solid start. The wonkiness soon begins in Infinity War, where Spider-Man is granted the Iron Spider suit he just rejected, something that was meant to be a physical embodiment of Stark. By rejecting the suit, he rejected life as Iron Boy, the newest Avenger. But now he wears the Iron Spider stoom and is knighted as an Avenger, to which Tom seems pleased. So much for Homecoming. His decision at that film's conclusion was portrayed as the right decision, a mature one, yet it's immediately walked back. Things got more confusing after Endgame. Iron Man dies, Natasha dies, Cap is a geezer, Thor is off-world, Captain Marvel sucks, and Hulk is lazy. So there's no flagship character anymore for the MCU. But maybe... Despite being a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, despite finding contentment with his life, and despite the fact that he rejected becoming an Avenger, Spidey is the most profitable, so somehow the creators determined him to fill that void. Spider-Man Far From Home follows with an opposing arc. Our hero wants to spend more time on vacation to grow his personal relationships, but this is treated like the selfish thing to do, since Nick Fury needs him to stop a world-ending event with Beck. Peter's edged on to become the next Iron Man, until we come to this realization delivered in a great moment between him and Happy.
You're not Iron Man. You're never gonna be Iron Man. Nobody could live up to Tony. Not even Tony.
It sucks that we're retreading ground from the first entry, but great scene.
12 seconds later.
Oh, I love Led Zeppelin!
What? What kind of message is being sent? Is Peter supposed to take Stark's role or not? Happy says one thing, but we're being shown another. After all the talk, Tom makes a new Spidey suit using Stark tech, while Back in Black plays, a song that already has a strong association with Tony. What are audiences supposed to take away from this? Marvel and Sony know what they should be doing with the character, but keep reverting back into Iron Boy mode. It's infuriating. Now, I'll change my tone for No Way Home. Again. Firstly, we've moved past Tony Stark. He's not important, he's not relevant, and he's barely mentioned. Spider-Man can finally be his own hero without worrying about filling someone else's shoes. And second, Phase 4 has pivoted heavily to the multiverse and exploring this concept. WandaVision teased it and disappointed everybody because haha funny. Loki actually did something by opening up the multiverse in its climax. No Way Home then capitalizes on this without making it a sick joke.
You think this is funny?
In a cosmic sort of way, yes.
Is this how you get your sick kicks?
What? It's just an ordinary crabby... Oh my goodness!
And who knows what'll happen in Multiverse of Madness. So the greater MCU served the trilogy well in the end. Too bad the middle bit was rough. The MCU's Spider-Man Home Trilogy leaves me confused, as audiences are given many shining bright spots, but with every compliment comes a caveat that detracts from it. Where there's potential, that potential is too often squandered. I want to love these films. You can see the greatness within, but the greatness is used to make mediocre high school comedies in line with the most generic MCU blockbusters. The latest entry, Spider-Man No Way Home, fixes many mistakes from its predecessors but bumps into new ones. Sorry if this is sounding harsh, I just forgot to say haha big funny enough times while watching them. I suppose only time will tell how this series is remembered, but only over a month since the third entry, and I'm confused. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to please leave a like, subscribe, and check out my social media. See you next time.